Oh, wait, you're listening?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
You're listening to Radiolab.
Radiolab.
From
WNYC.
See?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Jad Abumrad.
I'm Robert Krulwich.
This is Radiolab.
And today we're celebrating a multiple set of anniversaries because it was 80 years ago that Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater decided to allow Martians to invade the state of New Jersey. It's one of the most famous broadcasts in broadcast history because it freaked people out.
Yes. And then merely 10 years ago, we decided to take another look at this broadcast, which has gotten very complicated and layered and disputed in some ways over time. Here is our take on War of the Worlds.
October 30th, 1938. On that night, the United States experienced a kind of mass hysteria that we'd never seen before. And the reason, which today sounds almost comical, was a radio play.
Its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds.
Around 12 million people were listening. Most got the joke. It was Halloween after all. But if you consider that about 1 out of every 12 people didn't get the joke, that's what surveys found afterwards. About 1 out of every 12 people who heard the broadcast thought it was true, and that some percentage of that 1 million people ran out of their homes, towels over their faces, clutching children, tripping, breaking limbs. Well, that constitutes a major freakout. And in this our first ever live hour on Radiolab here at St. Paul, Minnesota at the Fitzgerald Theater, we ask, why? Why did people panic? And of course, we'll ask the big question as well, which is, can it happen again? Let's tune the dial.
Okay. Okay. I've got something on the dial
Good
here.
evening, ladies and gentlemen. From the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza Hotel in New York City, we bring you the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
Who is Marge, you know a Raymond Raquello?
The touch of the Spanish, Raymond Raquello leads off with La Comparsita.
Now, you don't know that there's no such person as Ramon Raquello and that it's just a record in a CBS studio, but it sounds professional enough, so you sit back, you relax. But then...
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. We now return you to the music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
World War II was right around the corner, and CBS sent a team of guys to cover this story. Among them, Edward R. Murrow.
Columbia continues its extensive coverage of the European crisis.
And in September, Murrow and his CBS producers did something with the news that was kind of novel. They broke in.
We interrupt this program of music by Harry James and his orchestra to bring you a bulletin just received in the WOR newsroom.
Now, this had happened before, but never quite like this, with live reports, eyewitness accounts, and never quite so much.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press.
In just 1 month, these bulletins have become so numerous
We interrupt our program to bring you a special broadcast.
that bulletins were practically interrupting bulletins.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special broadcast.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press.
We interrupt this program to take you to the NBC newsroom.
Here is a special bulletin.
From the NBC.
So after weeks and weeks of hearing these constant interruptions, it's easy to understand why this play
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago,
didn't sound like a play.
the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested the large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch on any further disturbances occurring on the planet Mars.
I don't know whether I need any more Raymond Raquello. I need to know a little more about this Martian thing.
Isn't it interesting how slowly it starts? And by the way, what time do you got on your pocket watch there?
The pocket watch says
8:04.
All right, 8:04. Tell me when it gets to 8:05.
And now.
This is my favorite minute in understanding one of the greatest media hoaxes of all times. Because the thing that's interesting is that at this moment in October of 1938, Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater of the Air were not that popular. They had a tiny slice of the audience. And so not too many people were listening, certainly not at the beginning from 8 o'clock to 8:04. And so not too many people heard this very important introduction.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Well, wait, why didn't they hear that?
Well, because at that very same moment, the majority of people listening were tuned into this.
The makers of Chase and Sanborn coffee, the superb blend you know is fresh, present the Chase and Sanborn Hour.
Ah, the Chase and Sanborn Hour. Now that was good. That was Ed Bergen. It had the puppet,
right.
Charlie
Puppet.
McCarthy, who liked girls. It was this.
That's right. It was the most popular show at the time. Ran opposite the Mercury Theater of the Air. Had 10 times the audience. But at 8:05, the host Don Amici introduces a not so popular singer.
And it's the rousing, rip-roaring Song of the Vagabonds from the Vagabond King. Come on, you beggar the Paris town,
No.
And just at that moment, thousands, hundreds, we don't know how many listeners started to dial surf. Where they landed on the Mercury Theater of the Air, already in progress, where they stayed put.
We are ready now to take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton,
Because by then, a strange meteor had landed.
where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer.
Professor, may I begin our questions?
Any time, Mr. Phillips.
You're quite convinced, as a scientist, that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars?
I say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
And yet, how do you account for these gas eruptions occurring on the surface of the planet at regular intervals?
Mr. Phillips, I cannot account for it.
Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, we've had 4 interruptions now. At this point, you've called your whole family into the room.
Marge, meteors on Mars, Marge. Meteors. What? Meteors on Mars.
And just as you are utterly confused, along comes the expert. You know, people surveyed afterwards said, I didn't believe this thing. I thought it was all baloney until I heard that government official guy or the Princeton professor. And this script is chock full of believable experts.
Dr. Gray of the Natural History Museum.
Professor Indelkoffer of the California Astronomical Society.
Brigadier General Montgomery Smith.
Captain Lansing of the Signal Corps.
Maybe subconsciously that had an effect to convince people that something was in fact happening. A feeling furthered a moment later when the professor and the reporter Carl Phillips go live to that field in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, where that meteorite, or whatever it is, has landed.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. This end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top blew! Look out there! Stand back! Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed.
Now, before we get too far into this scene, let me play you another clip.
The ship is riding majestically toward us like some great feather. The ship is no doubt best
Recognize this?
activities we can see.
No.
Orders are shouted to the crew.
No, let's listen a little bit more.
Lining the windows, looking down at the field ahead of them. It bursts into flames. Get it started. It's crashing. Oh my! Get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast. Oh, it's all the humanity and all the passengers screaming around it.
This is tape of the Hindenburg crash. Still fresh in people's minds. Happened 1 year before the broadcast. Before going on the air that night, actor Frank Reddick, who played that reporter Carl Phillips in the field, he went to the library, dug up this old tape, or not so old, and played it to himself.
All the humanity and all the passengers
over and over. To get himself in that right frame of mind for that now famous attack scene in that field in New Jersey.
If those creatures know what that means. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
The transmission cuts off. 12 million people have just heard slithery green aliens eviscerate policemen, farmers, and reporters, followed by nothing.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity.
When they do return, what you learn is that grounded flying saucer that just zapped all those men has now stood up. It's grown legs. It's as tall as a tree, and it is marching through the countryside, stopping everything in its path, and then we are taken to field reports, live battle scenes between militia and POS. But before we do, let me play one more clip. This one is real.
If you live in one of the areas mentioned and have a child of school age and wish to have him evacuated, you should send him to school tomorrow, Friday, with hand luggage containing the child's gas mask, a change of underclothing.
This is Edward R. Murrow reporting from London, same time period. Just to give you a sense of how scary it was to be alive at this moment in time. Kids in England were being told to take gas masks to school.
We're lucky we do have transcripts of what happened on the other side of radios that night, thanks to a Princeton sociologist who went out and conducted a series of interviews after the broadcast. And what's amazing is how effective that broadcast was. Some listeners said they actually felt like they were choking. Others reported to police that they saw with their own eyes, as they looked at the Manhattan skyline, they saw a thin veil of smoke from the battle over the city. Some said they saw Martian machines high-stepping their way down the Palisades, splash, splash, splash. And many people, when they called operators or police, they didn't say, oh my God, we're being invaded by Martians. They said, oh my God, we're being invaded by Germans.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen. Out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it and that both institutions are still open for business.
That was how Orson Welles concluded the War of the Worlds broadcast with those words. Basically, ha, it was a joke, gotcha. But it was only after he and his producer, John Houseman, left and read the papers the next day that they understood just how much trouble they had caused.
Well, it was very disagreeable because for at least a couple of hours, we believed we were mass murderers.
I'm extremely surprised to learn that a story which has become familiar to children through the medium of comic strips and
this is Wells in the press conference that following day.
Many succeeding novels and adventure stories should have had such an immediate and profound effect upon radio listeners.
But there is one thing we must not overlook. All this took place in 1938, in a less sophisticated yesteryear that did not know the atom bomb, guided missiles, and rockets that may shortly fly to the moon.
Edward R. Murrow, 1957. Was he correct when he said that?
Well, the 1938 New York broadcast caused a whole lot of trouble. Now, everybody here before who raised their hand and thought that this could happen again, you are right, again. Now, Buffalo, 1968.
Halloween night!
Updated for the times. It sounds kind of like your basic DJ set until you hear this.
What is it? Joe Downey has handed me something here that I'm supposed to read. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Let's see. The NASA, the National Space and Aeronautics Administration, those people have alerted all their space watch and facilities to be on the alert for unusual communication difficulties tonight. A spokesman for the federal agency referred to the explosions on the planet Mars and said it was not known if they would have the same effect on Earth communications as similar explosions on the surface of the sun have. I guess they're talking about sunspots and things like that. So, I don't know. That's, it means that it's going to be hard to hear communications from NASA. Can you hear me down there in South Carolina? As long as you can hear KB, what difference does it make about communication? Rock and roll. WKBW Jackson Armstrong communicating with your head. Halloween night. Getting it all together where it is. WKBW.
The WKBW broadcast followed the same structure as the original broadcast we've heard tonight. Long stretches of music, then the news bulletins, then the semi-realistic field reports. Here's one of them.
What do you got? You got walking injuries or real bad ones?
You got the same vivid descriptions of Martians.
That face, I can hardly look at it, Don. I can hardly look at it. It's dripping saliva.
And according to the station manager, Jeff Kay, you get the same outcome. People bought it.
The Buffalo Police and Telephone Company reported to WKBW that they received more than 4,000 phone calls. the Canadian military authorities dispatched military units to the Peace Bridge, the Rainbow Bridge, and the Queenston Bridge to repel invaders. The story was carried the next day by 47 newspapers countrywide, and on the night of the show and during the show, United Press bureaus up and down the east coast of America were besieged by phone calls asking about the Martian invasion in Buffalo. Incredible? You're absolutely right, it is incredible.
Thanks to the folks at WKBW Buffalo for that. What is this music, by the way?
This is the disco version of War of the Worlds, 1978.
There's a disco version.
Still sells a lot of copies, you'd be surprised. Here's the obvious question to ask. Why does this keep working?
Well, that's a difficult question. I came across a psychology professor.
I'm Richard Gehrig. I am a professor of psychology in the Cognitive Experimental Program at Stony Brook University.
He has this notion, Richard Gehrig does, that at root, people are suckers for stories. We just cannot help ourselves. When a story starts, you just kind of go...
I think the norm is to fall into the story, and that it's unusual to sort of keep yourself from falling in. My favorite example is there's a scene in Goldfinger.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah, the all-time best James Bond movie, I think, where Bond is tied down, spread eagle on a piece of metal, and there's this laser coming toward him, which really looks like it's going to cut him in two. And even as I'm saying that right now, I'm starting to feel a little bit of anxiety, because as I'm picturing it in my head and picturing that laser coming toward him, and, you know, spoiler alert, he doesn't actually get split in two by the laser. Yeah, sorry. But here's the thing. Go and watch the movie now and see if you can get through that scene without experiencing suspense. And it really seems to say something very powerful and strong about how immersed we can become in a narrative world.